I've been a cop in Briar Ridge for over 10 years. Nothing happens here. At least that's what I used to believe. Until I got the call. The call that changed everything. The call that still keeps me up at night. It was 2:13 a.m. I was parked on Main Street, drinking a stale gas station coffee, half watching a raccoon rummage through the trash. Then the radio crackled. Unit 2-1, respond to 44 Hollow Creek Road. Neighbors reporting screaming from inside the residence. Possibly domestic disturbance. 44 Hollow Creek. I knew that house. Everyone in Briar Ridge did. Dispatch. Confirm the caller? I asked. A pause. Then, anonymous. I sighed, tossing the coffee out the window. Hollow Creek was 6 miles outside town, past the old lumberyard, where the streetlights ended and the woods closed in. I had driven past that house maybe 100 times. Never once had I seen anyone outside. The owner was Daniel Wren. Lived alone. No criminal record, no complaints. Just a weird guy who kept to himself. But now someone was screaming in there, and I had to find out why. The drive felt longer than usual. The deeper I went, the darker it got. The road narrowed, swallowed by thick trees on both sides. By the time I pulled up, the house was just a shape in the dark. A 2-story farmhouse, gray paint peeling off the wood. The front porch light flickered, barely alive. Everything else was pitch black. No movement, no sign of trouble. But I could feel it. Something was wrong. I radioed in. Dispatch, I'm on scene. No visible disturbance. Copy that. Stand by. I stepped out of the cruiser. The gravel crunched under my boots. The air smelled off, like rotting wood and something else. Something faint. Something that made my stomach tighten. I climbed the porch steps, tried to peek through the front window, but the curtains were shut tight. I knocked 3 times. Mr. Wren, this is Officer Brooks with Briar Ridge PD. Can you come to the door? Silence. I knocked again. Harder. Sir, I need you to answer the door. Still nothing. But then, I heard it. A creak from inside, like someone shifting their weight on an old wooden floor. I reached for my radio. Dispatch, I have movement inside but no response. I'm making entry. Copy Unit 2-1. Proceed with caution. I tried the handle. Unlocked. I pushed the door open. The hinges groaned. The smell hit me instantly. Rot. Stagnant air. Something damp. Like a place that had been sealed off from the world for too long. I stepped inside. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight. The house was quiet. Too quiet. A single hallway stretched ahead, leading to the kitchen. The walls were covered in yellowed wallpaper, peeling at the edges. To my left, a dark living room. To my right, a staircase leading up. A single door at the end of the hall slightly open. And from inside, I heard breathing. Deep, slow, unnatural. Mr. Wren, I called out. No answer. Just that breathing. Steady. Rhythmic. I reached for my flashlight, clicked it on. The beam cut through the dark. The kitchen came into view. And that's when I saw it. A chair in the middle of the room. Facing away from me, someone was sitting in it. Motionless. Too still. My fingers hovered over my holster. Sir, I need you to turn around slowly. The breathing didn't change. Didn't stop. I stepped closer. The air felt thick. Sir, I'm not going to ask again. Nothing. I swallowed hard. Then, I circled around. Daniel Wren was sitting in the chair. His hands folded neatly in his lap. His head tilted slightly to the side. His eyes were open, blank, unfocused, like he was staring through me. And his mouth, it was sewn shut. I staggered back. My heart pounded in my chest. His lips were stitched together with thick, black thread. Dried blood crusted along the seams. His nostrils flared, sucking in air through his nose. That's why the breathing sounded so wrong. Because he couldn't open his mouth. Jesus Christ. I grabbed my radio. Dispatch. I need backup at 44 Hollow Creek. The radio cut to static. I shook it. Dispatch, do you copy? Nothing. Just that low, crackling static. like someone was holding the button down, jamming the signal. Then I heard it. A single creak from the second floor. Someone else was in the house, watching me, waiting. I slowly reached for my gun. And from upstairs, a voice, faint, sing-song, mocking. "You shouldn't be here, officer." The voice came from upstairs, soft, sing-song, like whoever said it wasn't afraid of me, like they had been waiting for me. I swallowed hard. My grip tightened on my gun. The air inside the house felt wrong. Too still, too thick. Daniel Wren's shallow breathing was the only sound behind me. I wanted to get him out, call for backup. But my radio was still dead. And someone else was in here, watching, listening, waiting. My boots creaked on the floor as I moved toward the staircase. I stepped carefully, keeping my back to the wall. Aiming my flashlight up, I saw the second floor hallway stretching into the dark. The walls were covered in old, yellowed wallpaper, peeling at the seams. At the end of the hall, a door stood open. A warm glow flickered from inside, like candlelight, like someone had prepared a room for me. "Briar Ridge PD," I called out. No response, just the low hum of the house settling. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate. Someone was moving in that room. I raised my gun, stepped forward. The closer I got, the worse the smell became. Not just rot, something else, something sweet, like copper and perfume. My pulse pounded in my ears. I pressed my back against the wall beside the door, took a breath, then swung inside. The room was wrong. A bedroom, but not lived in. The walls were lined with hundreds of Polaroids, pinned in perfect rows. Each one was a picture of a person. Different faces, different ages. Men, women, all staring at the camera. Some of them smiling, some of them crying. But they all had one thing in common. Their mouths were sewn shut. A chill ran through me. I scanned the room, my gun raised. The bed was made perfectly. The single nightstand had a candle burning. Beside it, a pair of scissors, and a spool of thick black thread. Then I saw it. On the desk, another photo, not pinned to the wall, just sitting there, waiting for me to see it. I stepped closer, lifted it with trembling fingers. My breath caught in my throat. The photo was of me, taken tonight, through the front window of my cruiser. Before I even got out of the car, I spun around, my gun trained on the door. But the hallway was empty. No movement, no sound, only the burning sensation of being watched. "Come downstairs, officer." The voice was right below me now. Daniel Wren's voice. But that was impossible. He was still in the chair. I could still hear his shallow, wet breathing from the kitchen. And yet, I knew if I went down there, if I looked, I wouldn't like what I found. I took one last look around the bedroom, then backed into the hallway, keeping my gun raised. A new sound filled the air, a low, wet snipping, like scissors slicing through fabric. It was coming from the first floor, from the kitchen, right where Daniel Wren was. I forced myself down the steps. Each creak of the wood made my skin crawl. The smell got worse, heavier, like something rotting in the walls. I stepped back into the kitchen and stopped cold. Daniel Wren was no longer in the chair. The thread that had sewn his lips shut was on the floor, cut, snipped apart. Blood trailed from the chair to the hallway, leading deeper into the house. "Mr. Wren," I called out. My own voice sounded wrong in here, like the house was swallowing the sound. I followed the blood trail, down the hall, to a door I hadn't noticed before, a basement door, standing slightly ajar. The snipping sound stopped. I hesitated. Every part of me screamed not to go down there, but I had no choice. If Wren was still alive, I had to find him. I pulled the door open wider. Cold air rushed up from below. Thick, damp. I aimed my flashlight down. The basement stairs disappeared into total darkness. I took a breath. Then I descended. One step at a time. The smell clawed at my throat. The deeper I went, the worse it got, like something rotting deep underground. The floor leveled out. The walls were old brick, the floor dirt-packed. I swept my light across the space. Then I saw him. Daniel Wren, sitting on the cold ground, his mouth free of stitches now, his lips raw and bloody, his eyes wide open. Jesus, Wren. I took a step forward. His hand shot up. Not at me, at something behind me, something in the shadows, something I hadn't seen yet. His face contorted in fear. You need to run. My stomach dropped. My light flickered, and then I heard it. A long, slow inhale. Someone else was in the basement. I turned fast, and saw a figure crouched in the corner. It was a woman, thin, too thin, wearing a white dress, stained and torn. Her hair hung in clumps over her face, and in her bony hands, she held a pair of scissors, the same kind used to cut the stitches. Her breathing was shaky, erratic. Then, she tilted her head toward me. Her mouth twisted into a smile, and I saw that it was stitched shut. Fresh thread pulled tight, blood dripping down her chin. Her hand twitched, and the scissors snapped open. A sharp, metallic click that made my stomach twist. The woman's stitched mouth stretched into a smile. The thread was fresh, tight. Blood dripped from the punctures in her lips. And yet, she didn't look like she was in pain. She looked like she was waiting for me. Put the scissors down, I ordered, keeping my gun trained on her. She didn't move, didn't blink, just kept grinning through the stitches. I felt Wren staring at me. I turned to him, my voice low, urgent. Who is she? His breathing was shallow. His hands shook. You don't understand, he whispered. She was the first. The first? A chill crawled down my spine. First what? I didn't get an answer, because the woman lurched forward. I staggered back, my flashlight swinging wildly. She didn't run, she moved wrong, like she was falling toward me on purpose. Her feet barely lifted off the ground, her arms twitching at her sides. Her head tilted, like she was listening for something. Then, she stopped, just a few feet away, breathing too fast, too erratic. Then she did something that made my blood run cold. She reached up and started pulling at the stitches. My stomach turned. She yanked the black thread loose, one stitch at a time. Her skin tore. The blood welled up, running down her chin, pooling at her collarbone. Her chest heaved. She was giggling, muffled at first, then clearer as more stitches came loose. The sound was wrong. High, shaking, like she hadn't laughed in years, like she had been waiting for this moment. Jesus Christ, I breathed. I turned to Wren, panic rising. Who did this to her? Who the hell is she? His face was ashen. He swallowed hard. She used to own the house. My pulse hammered. What? It was her house before I moved in. Before the others. Before. His eyes flickered to something behind me, and that's when I heard it. A low creak from the basement ceiling. Not from the house settling. From something above us. Something moving. I turned my flashlight upward. The wooden beams cast deep shadows. First I saw nothing. Then, a hand. A thin, pale hand slipping through the floorboards. Fingers tapping gently. One by one. Like a signal. Like a warning. I stepped back. Who else is in this house? I whispered. Daniel Wren didn't answer. His eyes were locked onto the woman. Still giggling. Still pulling at the last of her stitches. Then she spoke. Her voice came out wet, raw, like her throat had forgotten how to make sounds. He's waiting. My hands clenched around my gun. Who? Her eyes met mine, wide, excited. She took a shaky step closer, and whispered one word. Jack. Every hair on my body stood on end. What did you just say? She tilted her head. A slow, unnatural motion. Jack. My stomach twisted. I had never told Wren my first name. Never said it over the radio. So how the hell did she know it? The tapping above us stopped. A deep, crawling silence filled the room. Then, a loud slam upstairs. Like a door had been thrown open. Daniel Wren's face drained of color. His lips trembled. It's too late. I grabbed his arm. Move. I pulled him up, dragging him toward the stairs. The woman didn't try to stop us. Just stood there, smiling, her mouth bleeding, her head tilted back, like she was listening, like she could hear something I couldn't. We reached the first floor. The house was different now. The air felt tighter. The front door was wide open. Rain whipped into the entryway. I moved fast, pulling Ren with me. "Come on, let's." Then I saw them, standing in the driveway. 3 people, perfectly still, dressed in dark, rain-soaked clothes, watching the house, watching me. One of them took a step forward. A man, tall, lean, wearing a black suit, his head tilted slightly, like he was amused, like he was seeing me for the first time. Even though I knew deep down, he had been watching me all along. The others followed, silent, patient, like they had done this before, like they were waiting for me to understand, to finally accept it. Ren's grip tightened on my wrist. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Jack, they picked you." My chest locked up. "What are you talking about?" His eyes filled with something horrible. "They always pick someone. And tonight, it's you." The tall man smiled, and I heard my own voice in my head. A memory from earlier. The radio call. Anonymous tip. No caller. No name. Like the call had been placed for me. To bring me here. To make sure I walked inside. Like the whole thing had been planned from the start. I turned back to the house. The woman in the basement was standing in the doorway now, staring at me, her lips still dripping, still smiling, like she knew exactly what came next. The tall man took another step forward. He raised his hand and motioned for me to come with him. Not forcefully, not violently, just patient, like he knew I wasn't leaving, like I had already made my choice. The tall man beckoned me forward. Not forcefully, not aggressively, just waiting, like he knew I'd come to him, like he knew I had no choice. Rain pounded the driveway. The wind howled through the trees. The 3 figures stood perfectly still, watching, waiting, like I was the only one who didn't understand what was happening. Daniel Ren's breath hitched. His fingers dug into my wrist. "Jack." His voice shook. "Don't move." But I couldn't look away. The tall man's face was familiar. Not someone I knew, but someone I had seen before. In the background, in passing cars, in the crowd at the gas station. Noticing him too late. And now standing here, I knew. He had been watching me for a long time. I clenched my jaw, raised my gun. "Stay right there." The tall man smiled. Calm, patient smile. Then, he spoke. His voice was low, measured. "You're not ready yet." Then he turned and walked into the woods. The other 2 followed. I stared after them, heart pounding. The rain swallowed them whole. I couldn't hear them running, couldn't hear anything. Just the wind, the rain, the faint sound of Daniel Ren crying. "Jack." His voice was barely above a whisper. "They'll come back." I turned to him. "Who are they?" His bloodshot eyes locked onto mine. "They do this every few years. They pick someone. And they don't stop until you're one of them." My stomach tightened. "One of them." His breath shuddered. I tried to fight it too. I stared at him, took in his hollow face, his stitched mouth, his shaking hands, the way he never tried to leave. And I understood. Daniel Ren wasn't a victim. Not anymore. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. I needed to go. I needed to get the hell out of here. I grabbed my radio. "Dispatch, do you copy?" Static. I gritted my teeth. "This is Officer Brooks. I need immediate backup." The static cut out. Then, a voice. Not dispatch. A man's voice. Calm. Unbothered. "Jack." My blood ran cold. "You already know there's no backup coming." Then, the line went dead. My fingers went numb around the radio. I turned to Ren. "How do I stop this?" His face twisted. "You can't." I grabbed his shirt, shoved him against the wall. "Tell me how to make them stop." His eyes darted past me, back toward the open basement door. His breath hitched, and I knew. The answer was down there. I turned toward the stairs. The air coming from below was thick and damp. The walls seemed to close in, but I had no choice. I descended. The basement was worse than before. colder, like something had been waiting for me to come back. The woman wasn't there. The scissors lay abandoned on the floor. And then I saw it. The far wall. The part of the basement I hadn't noticed before. At first I thought it was a mural. Painting. But as I stepped closer, I realized it was faces. Hundreds of them. Painted onto the bricks in perfect detail. Every one of them with their mouths sewn shut. My stomach churned. I raised my flashlight and froze, because in the far corner of the wall, a new face was being added. Not painted, carved. The outline was half finished. But I knew who it was. I recognized the jawline, the hair, the eyes. It was me. I staggered back. No, 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 no. I turned, bolted up the stairs. My pulse roared in my ears. Ren was gone. The front door was wide open. The storm raged outside. But in the distance, beyond the trees, I saw them, the three figures, standing in the dark, watching me, waiting, for me to understand, for me to join them, for me to become the next one. I grabbed my keys, my hands shaking. I threw myself into the cruiser. The engine roared to life. The headlights cut through the storm. But before I could pull away, my phone buzzed. I hesitated, looked down. A new message. No name, no number, just 2 words. See you soon. The radio crackled. Jack. The tall man's voice. Calm, patient. You can't run from this. I gritted my teeth, turned the cruiser around and floored the gas. The headlights cut through the storm. The house disappeared into the dark. But I could still feel them watching. The figures in the driveway. The woman in the basement. Like they knew I wasn't really gone. Like this wasn't over. I grabbed my radio. Dispatch, do you copy? I need backup now. Silence. Then, a voice that wasn't dispatch. Jack. You were never supposed to leave. Then static. My hands tightened on the wheel. I wasn't playing their game. I wasn't going back. But then, the road changed. I slammed on the brakes. My heart lurched. Because I was right back where I started. Right in front of 44 Hollow Creek Road. The house stood in the rain. Porch light flickering. Waiting. I sucked in a shaky breath. My radio clicked on again. A new voice. A woman. Soft. Familiar. Jack? Let it happen. My chest tightened. Because I knew who it was. The woman from the basement. Her voice was clearer now. Like she wasn't down there anymore. Like she was here with me. I looked in the rearview mirror. Saw nothing. Just the dark road behind me. But the feeling was getting stronger. The weight of something in the back seat. Breathing. Waiting. I turned. And the passenger door was open. Rain spilling onto the seat. A single pair of wet footprints leading inside. I nearly lost it. I hit the gas hard. The cruiser skidded. Fishtailed. But I kept going. Faster, faster, past the trees, past the point of no return. And this time, I didn't look back. When I finally reached town, the streetlights were a welcome sight. I pulled into the station, parked, hands still shaking, my uniform soaked in sweat. For a moment I just sat there, tried to breathe, tried to convince myself I was safe, that I had really made it out. Then, my radio crackled one last time. A new voice. Deep, calm. Not from dispatch. Not from anyone I knew. See you soon.